Welcome to Preparing for the Unexpected. I'm your host, Alex Fullick, and as always, we like to talk about things related to resilience and business continuity, and lots of other relatable subjects. We're going to do something a little bit different this week. We're going to air some episodes talking about resilience with my guest, Jason Haas. Hi, Jason.
Hey, Alex. Hey, everyone. Hope everyone's doing well.
We wanted to contribute to the BCI World's Business Continuity and Resilience Awareness Week. Unfortunately, all their webinars were full, and we still wanted to do something with them. So we thought we'd record a couple of our own and release them in conjunction with Business Continuity Awareness Week. Thanks to everyone at BCI for the Awareness Week. We're happy to give you this little extra bonus, and please don't hate us or send us any bad emails. We love working with you guys. Well, welcome, Jason. As I said in our introduction, we are going to talk about personal resilience today. We've got lots to say, and you've got some interesting stories to share. So why don't we jump straight into our first one? And
Well,
that is a decade of addiction.
right. A decade of addiction, a codependent partner perspective. So, gosh, we can rewind the clock here about 25 years because that's about when it starts. Seems forever ago. When I met my wife at that time, girlfriend, she was a professional public educator. And one of the things public educators do to decompress from a challenging workday is hit a bar up afterwards. No, typically normal in most cases and things like that. But as my wife climbed the executive ladder within public education, and to keep in mind, she was part of a special education, which if anybody's in tune with that, it's an extremely important and extremely stressful portion of public education. So as she grew through the ranks in public education, going from a teacher to a supervisor to an executive director, so pretty much running special education for a school district, her coping mechanisms became more and more in line with decompressing with alcohol to deal with the stresses of life. That exacerbated by, starting a new family. We'd gotten married. We've been married now. This is going to be a test here. This will
You
either work
better
well
get it
for me or
right.
not. We'll have been married for almost 15 years this October, which is crazy. It's my daughter's age plus one. Um, and as she grew through those ranks and had more and more struggles with alcohol, that of course, came into the household. It impacted me personally, impacted our children and things like that. So with that addiction and thinking about it as in part of resilience, especially personal resilience, is that coping mechanisms or a pivot strategy. How do you work through those type of challenges? It's in your house. You can't get away from it. You go to one room, it follows you. You go into another room, it follows you. You leave the house, it's there waiting for you when you return. So there's no escape from it. So I worked in trying to develop coping mechanisms, knowing that there was no hiding from it, no running away from it, but the only way was to face it head on and manage it to the best that I could. And I tell you, I failed miserably a lot of times. When I'm dealing with things that are so close, so personal, affairs of the heart, so to speak, judgment gets cloudy. Words are said that probably shouldn't have been said. The journey is paved with regrets and things I can never take back. And I imagine the same applies to my spouse. So coping mechanisms, one, defining ways where you can vent and share your truth, maybe not the truth, but your truth with others to work through it, to make sure you can see through the trees, see the forest through the trees. And for me, that was family and very close friends who had intimate knowledge that I would share in all this. And also the other important thing of the coping mechanism, sharing that truth. Now, granted, you'll hear me say the truth, my truth, her truth. I'm a believer of the three truths. There's my truth, your truth, and somewhere in the middle is the actual truth.
Yeah,
Because
I believe the
we all
same
have,
thing.
yeah, implicit bias that we bring to this and recalling those stressful, maybe traumatic outcomes, we may remember it differently. As that trauma bond may just tell us that it didn't happen that way, or we just perceive things differently in trauma. So part of that coping mechanism is, sharing in my truth with my friends and close family, and, mainly looking for people to listen, not necessarily for advice. To know that I could safely talk about things that are challenging, whether, the spouse was emotionally abusive. Unfortunately, with my wife, she was not a happy alcoholic. She was a very mean, angry alcoholic. And when she got into her bottle of wine, wine was her drink of choice. That's when you knew you were in trouble. So finding those coping mechanisms, knowing that that person who is arguing with you or yelling at you or berating you or whatever to you, knowing that it's not them, of trying to separate the disease of alcoholism from the individual. Really, really hard to do, especially when it's a spouse, because they are of the same person. But still, knowing that when my wife was in that anger state, knowing that wasn't really her, those words coming out of her mouth were that of the alcoholic and not of the individual. Um, but still holding that person accountable for their actions, whether it's breaking things, saying things, getting into a verbal fight. Nothing for me ever rose to the level of physicality, thank goodness. But the verbal abuse on both sides became unbearable at times. So finding those safe harbors in which you can talk through your truth, realize where you've made mistakes, challenge yourself to do better, and know that you're not alone in things. And also to realize that it's okay not to be okay. So for
Mhm.
me, coping mechanisms and support systems were so critical in allowing me to survive this very traumatic event. And this event for me lasted over a decade. In the end, alcoholism's a heck of a disease that we, as an outsider, can't solve for other people. They have to come to that conclusion and that decision that they don't accept what they're doing anymore. And there's nothing that we can do besides guide them in hopefully healthy decision making, which if they're suffering from alcoholism, chances are healthy decision making isn't part of that equation. But just leaning into it and trying to guide them towards good decision making, to realize errors of their way as well as your own errors, and just talking through it. Man, is that hard.
Yes, I agree. I'll share the story of my dad. He drank for many years. He was my parents and all of us were. My mom was born in Canada, but my brothers and I and my parents met all in England. So everybody grew up there. When we came to Canada, I think after a few years, when my parents split up, my dad regretted coming here. He dealt with it by turning to alcohol. So he ended up losing his job. We didn't see him as much growing up. I'm glad that later in life, in his last 8, 9, no, almost 10 years, we got a lot closer and became friends and were able to talk. But he drank himself way too much and made himself sick. And he fell one day. We don't know if he was, had alcohol in his system or not when he fell, but it was bad enough he was in the hospital and he had to go to rehab afterwards and everything. And after that, we never saw him drink again. However, when he passed away a few years later, this is back in 2017 in February when he passed away, when they did an autopsy because he collapsed at home, they found that yeah, he had alcohol, a lot of alcohol in his system, and it was one of the reasons why he passed. And he hid it from us after a while. And I think it was because he didn't have the network and he was too ashamed. He was Old English. So Old English is keep it to yourself, stiff upper lip and deal with it. And he couldn't. And unfortunately, in the end, it contributed to his heart disease. It contributed to his overall health, his well-being, and his loneliness because he was too ashamed to go back to England with where his family is, and it it worries me sometime, and it's actually because of my dad is why I quit drinking years ago. I thought I don't want to end up down that same path. I don't want to get to the point where I don't know what's going on or where I'm really doing damage to myself. And it's not easy when you have a loved one who's going through that. And we were separated by cities. So it was very easy for him to hide it when I would show up for a visit. And wasn't easy to deal with when he finally passed. It was really tough because there were so many things I wanted to say. And I know there were so many things he wanted to say.
And those are without a doubt the most challenging of circumstances there. And I'm so sorry for that pain that you've experienced, but I think you're managing it to the best of your ability. My wife also suffered from some negative outcomes from her alcoholism. Luckily, my wife has transcended it. She's been sober, gosh, going on, I think, a little over 4 years now. So proud of her, and
Wonderful,
it's
wonderful.
an amazing feat. But during that journey, between the stress, the alcoholism, life in general, just the burdens of that, um, we woke up one morning. We were relatively new to Colorado, didn't realize where hospitals were, didn't just were unaware of the things around us. Which, by the way, if you ever move to a new area, always identify the closest emergency room. That's all I have to say. So we woke up at some weird early hour for whatever reason, and she woke up where she couldn't breathe. And panicking, and just when you can't breathe or catch your breath, that's going to induce panic into anyone. So we made a decision going, okay, we need to get to an emergency room. Not sure why. Wife's having trouble breathing. It's time that we move, and we move quickly. So she's getting things together. We're waking up small children, getting them dressed because it's now a family affair. It's just not like I can leave two littles at home alone. And being new to Colorado, I didn't have anyone to call to come over and sit at the house. So
Yeah.
gather up the family and head to the nearest emergency room. We eventually figured that out. Once we got into the ER and my wife was admitted and assessed, I had a nurse come out to me saying, "Do you realize your wife almost died? She is blue as can be. Blue as a Smurf. She had a blood ox, I think, in the low 70% area. And it we went from emergency room. She was admitted. She was in the hospital for a couple of days, but a long story short, because there's so much to it, is she ended up developing a rare lung disease, interstitial lung disease. So through all this adversity and trauma that she's had, it triggered her body to revolt against itself, to not absorb oxygen. And keep in mind, we live in Colorado. We live at elevation. Air's thin already. That
Mhm.
exacerbated everything on top of it. So, getting how diseases can be triggered from personal adversity, whether it's alcoholism, addiction, other addiction, stress in general. Stress is so bad. Um, it's an amazing feat. And from that, she had to have oxygen for about 6 months to 8 months. It eventually led to more personal adversity where she had lost her employment. At that time, it was our only employment out here. So our income went to zero, which that's another stressor on top of all of this, is when you don't have income in a high cost area, or really any area, it leads to other types of adversity. But to bring this back around under coping mechanisms and things like that, this is why it's so important, whether it's a spouse, a loved one, a family member, a friend, is when you see something, we must say something. We can never accept that one, oh, they're the funny drunk or the angry drunk, or the person who gets high all the time, or whatever it may be. We need to address this. And one, we need to normalize it's okay not being okay,
Yep.
and that we all struggle differently. We have no reason why somebody else might be struggling, but if we take that time out of our day and our busy schedules to listen, to understand and hear their why, maybe that's a call for help, and maybe we can help connect the dots for them. We're not there to solve it for them, but we can be enablers in the process. For my wife to find her sobriety was after she had lost her job in public education. She worked at a liquor store for a while, which is awesome for an alcoholic, horrible for a spouse, um, because that was coming home every day, additional alcohol. And through that, she eventually quit that and went to work for United States Postal Service. Was accused of drinking on the job, sent home one night. This was just before we went into lockdown for COVID. And it was at that moment where her and I had I call them come to Jesus talks. I'm not overly religious, but it's when you just have that moment of absolute truth, saying that drink in your hand. One, I don't understand why you took an Uber home from work when your vehicle's fine. But as the story unfolded, having that come to Jesus conversation of that drink that you're holding right now will be the last drink you ever have. Otherwise, the outcome is divorce. This is not something that we can tolerate anymore as a family, as me as an individual. Is decisions are going to make. Either you love alcohol or you love me. You can't love both.
Mhm.
And it was at that point where she grew and realized the error of her ways, or at least that's what I'm hoping. This is me putting bias onto it, by the way. And From that point forward, she sought sobriety during lockdown, attended AA meetings virtually. Pre all of this, she had attended AA meetings before, unsuccessfully. I attended Al Anon meetings. What a great organization and a great coping mechanism of like-minded individuals who all suffer from alcoholic spouses or friends or family, whoever it may be. Um, yeah, working through that is absolutely crazy, and having strong coping mechanisms to shelter yourself, that inner critic and that growth mindset to know that this really sucks right now. But as long as you can keep pushing, you can get through this, and to encourage your spouse or partner or loved one to do better, to see the light, to find sobriety and things like that, and just keep working at that. And also realizing at some point you need to cut your losses.
Mhm.
Not everything we can win. Not everyone will make that decision to find sobriety and to get out of addiction. Others will succumb to it. And it's an absolute shame when it comes that way, but in the end, they're individuals, they have decisions.
On that, we'll take a break and we'll be back with more stories to share. Thank you, Jason. And before we do go on a break, congratulations to your wife.
Thank you.
That's wonderful. We'll be right back. If you liked that video, thumbs up. If you didn't like that video, thumbs down. But leave me a message and let me know your thoughts. Of course, don't forget to subscribe. And in the meantime, stay prepared, everybody.